I always believed my family was completely normal, quiet, hardworking people who kept to themselves. But 3 weeks ago, after my grandfather passed away, I inherited a remote wooden cabin deep in the forests of Northern Maine. No one else in the family wanted it. In fact, my uncle explicitly told me to leave it alone and put it up for sale immediately. But when I went there to clean the place out, I dragged an old rug away from the wall and found a hidden iron latch set into the hardwood floor. Down in that cellar, among dust and decay, was a lockbox containing audio cassettes and journals. The last entry was dated July 14th, 1999, the exact day I was born. And what was written inside proved that my entire life, my family name, and the death of my parents was all an elaborate, calculated lie. My grandfather, Arthur, was a man of very few words. He was a retired lawyer, meticulous to a fault, who kept every receipt, contract, and letter organized in perfectly labeled folders. When he died at the age of 84, his estate was divided among his children. But this cabin, a secluded two-story wooden structure miles away from the nearest paved road, was left specifically to me in his will. When I arrived on a cold Friday evening, the place smelled of pine, old paper, and damp wood. The power was off, so I worked by the yellow beam of a heavy flashlight. My plan was simple: pack up his personal belongings, assess the condition of the building, and head back to the city by Sunday. On my second night, while clearing out the master bedroom on the ground floor, I dragged a heavy, faded oriental rug away from the wall. That's when the flashlight beam caught something metallic embedded in the floorboards. It was an iron latch, painted matte black to blend in with the dark oak floor. Next to it was a heavy brass keyhole. I remember the old pocket watch my grandfather always carried, the one he had left me in his coat pocket. I ran up to my bag, retrieved the watch, and popped open the back casing. Taped inside was a tiny, notched brass key. My heart was beating surprisingly fast in the quiet cabin. I slid the key into the floorboards, turned it, and heard a heavy mechanical click. I hoisted the wooden trapdoor open. A rush of cold, stagnant air blew into my face, carrying a faint metallic smell. I shone the flashlight down. A flight of wooden steps led into a concrete subterranean room beneath the cabin. The cellar wasn't an ordinary basement. It was built like a fallout shelter. Reinforced concrete walls, steel filing cabinets, a small wooden desk, and shelves filled with leather-bound journals and audio cassettes. I descended the stairs, every step creaking under my weight. On the desk sat a vintage cassette player, surrounded by decades of dust. I walked over to the shelf. The journals were organized chronologically, starting from 1978. I pulled out the last one. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting. I flipped straight to the back. The entry for July 14th, 1999 read, "The trade was completed at 3 a.m. God forgive us for what we have done, but the integrity of this family must be protected at all costs. The boy is now ours. He must never know the truth about Sarah, nor what happened to her husband." I stood paralyzed in the dim light of my flashlight. July 14th, 1999 was the day I was born. Growing up, I was told that my biological parents died in a tragic car crash when I was just 6 months old, and Arthur had raised me as his own son ever since. My hands trembled as I scanned the shelf for a tape labeled with that date. I found a cassette with handwritten black ink. "July 1999, Sarah." I popped the tape into the player, inserted fresh batteries, and hit play. Static filled the quiet room, followed by the muffled sound of a young woman weeping hysterically. "Please, Arthur." Her voice sobbed through the speaker. "You can't do this. Give it back to me. I'll destroy the documents. I swear I won't print a single word." Then came my grandfather's voice, cold, slow, and entirely devoid of emotion. "You should have thought about that before you started digging through my firm's files, Sarah. You signed the surrender papers. Your debt is paid. Your hush money is in an offshore account. and the child will be raised with opportunities you could never dream of providing. If you ever come near my family again, the evidence we hold against your brother will be sent directly to the federal prosecutor." The tape cut to static. I fell back into the wooden chair, my breath ragged. I wasn't the orphan of a tragic accident. I was the child of a woman named Sarah, who had been blackmailed into giving me up. My grandfather hadn't taken me in out of love. He had taken me as leverage to silence a threat to his family. I began pulling open the steel filing cabinet drawers. Inside were thick manila folders marked with bank statements and legal non-disclosure agreements. At the bottom of the last drawer, I found an unmarked heavy metal lockbox. Unlike the rest of the basement, this box wasn't covered in dust. The metal around the lock was scratched, as if someone had recently used a key on it. I forced the latch open with a screwdriver from my toolkit. Inside were hundreds of photographs, but they weren't historical photos. They were recent. Photo after photo showed me walking into my university library 2 years ago, me sitting in a coffee shop with my girlfriend last summer, a photo taken just 2 weeks ago showing me unlocking my apartment door in the city. On the back of the most recent photograph, written in sharp, aggressive handwriting, was a note. "He looks more like his father every day. Keep monitoring him until the estate probate is finalized. Make sure he doesn't start looking into Arthur's old archives." I recognized that handwriting instantly. It belonged to my Uncle Richard, Arthur's eldest son, who had insisted I sell or demolish this cabin immediately. He wasn't just trying to get rid of an old property. He knew what was down here, and he had been paying someone to stalk me for years to ensure I never found out who I really was. As I stood in that underground room staring at the photographs of my own life, I heard a sound from above. Heavy footsteps walking across the wooden porch upstairs. I froze, killing my flashlight instantly. Darkness engulfed the basement. The heavy front door creaked open above me. I heard low voices, 2 men speaking in hushed tones. "Are you sure he's not here?" a voice asked. "His car is parked down the lane," replied a second voice, a voice I recognized with terrifying clarity. It was Uncle Richard. "He's probably out exploring the woods." We set the fire in the kitchen, locked the doors from the outside, and let the whole place go up. By the time the fire department gets here, the timber will be ashes and whatever my father left down here burns with it. My stomach dropped. They weren't just going to burn the evidence. They didn't care if I was inside or not. A cold, sharp rage took over. I grabbed the cassette tape, the journal from 1999, and the folder containing the surveillance photos, stuffing them into my backpack. I silently crept up the concrete stairs and pushed the floor latch open just as Richard walked into the living room, holding a red plastic jerrycan of gasoline. "Looking for these, Uncle Richard?" I said, stepping out of the shadows into the moonlight streaming through the window. Richard stopped dead in his tracks, dropping the gasoline container. His face went completely pale, his eyes darting to the open hatch in the floor behind me, then to the backpack slung over my shoulder. "Julian," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "What are you doing down there? You shouldn't be snooping around in things you don't understand." "Understand enough," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I listened to the 1999 tape, Richard. I know I'm not who you told me I was. And I know about Sarah." Richard stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The man standing next to him, a burly guy in a work jacket, shifted uncomfortably. "Get out, Marcus," Richard barked at the man. Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked out the front door, leaving the two of us alone in the dark house. Richard took a deep breath. When he looked back up at me, the arrogant mask had fallen away. "You think Arthur was the villain here?" Richard sneered quietly. "You think your mother was an innocent victim? Let me tell you what really happened in 1999, Julian." He stepped closer. Sarah wasn't just a journalist. She was an investigative reporter hired by our family's rivals to destroy Arthur's firm. She didn't just find corruption, she created it. She set up illegal offshore accounts in Arthur's name to frame him. But she made one massive mistake. She got involved with my younger brother, your father. I shook my head. That's a lie. Your father found out she was using him. Richard continued, his voice tight. They had a fight in a vehicle on a coastal highway. The crash wasn't an accident caused by bad weather. Your father realized what she was doing and tried to pull the car over. He died in that crash. Sarah survived. He pointed a finger at my backpack. Arthur didn't steal you. Sarah offered you to him. She knew that if Arthur handed her evidence over to the prosecutor, she would spend 25 years in prison. So she made a deal. She handed you over to Arthur, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and agreed to disappear in exchange for her freedom. And the photos? I demanded. Why have you been stalking me? Because the non-disclosure agreement expired the day Arthur died, Richard said coldly. And 2 weeks ago, Sarah resurfaced. She wants her cut of the family trust. And if she doesn't get it, she threatens to go public with a story about how Arthur Vance kidnapped her child 25 years ago. I hired investigators to make sure she hadn't made contact with you first. I looked at Richard, then down at the backpack containing the evidence. The cabin isn't burning down tonight, Richard, I said quietly, stepping toward the door. And you're going to pay out whatever trust money was agreed upon. And if I don't, Richard asked, then tomorrow morning, every recorded tape, every journal entry, and every legal document in that basement gets sent directly to the press and the state attorney general. You can explain the whole story to a judge. Richard didn't move. He stood there in the dark, watching me walk out into the cold night air. I drove away from that cabin at 3 a.m., the exact time recorded on the cassette tape 25 years ago. Yesterday afternoon, I pulled up to a small white house with a blue front door in a coastal town 40 miles away. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, watching a woman with gray-streaked hair working in the garden out front. I don't know if she's a victim who was forced to give up her child or a ruthless manipulator who traded me for her freedom. But as I opened my car door and stepped onto the gravel driveway, I realized there was only one way to find out.